Right. Welcome, everybody. This is, I hope, a very productive hour for all of us. At this time of the afternoon, when you're getting tired and you look out your window and you see the traffic jams due to to load shedding, I appreciate everybody that's joining us for this session. Um, this is a writing workshop that we present not only for young academics and not only for design academics who want to take part in Defsa, but that is how we started as a Defsa community to reach out, because we realized that Defsa provides an opportunity for many young academics to publish their first paper. So we are very happy to welcome Dr. Sue Giloi and Yolandi Burger to share their experiences with us as experienced researchers. Dr. Sue Giloi is the Chief Academic Officer at Inscape, responsible for the management of the academic team, as well as for program development and accreditation. And Sue was also the president of Defsa from 2017 to 2019. And Yolandi is a research fellow in the School of Design and Creative Arts at Loughborough University in the UK. And she's specifically looking at graphic heritage and that intersection of graphic design, urban design, tourism, and heritage, and also then the development of design curricula that speak to students being a holistic being. And Yolandi works part-time for various institutions, and we're privileged for her also to share her experiences with us. So the session is divided as follows. We're first going to talk general, and Sue is going to deal with that part, looking at academic publication and a little bit of an introduction to this academic world. And Yolandi is going to share some tips from personal experience. And lastly, depending on how much time we've got left, we're going to look at some of the Defsa requirements. You can see underneath each of the speakers, their org IDs. And if any of you have not made your own org ID, take
Have we lost Ria?
Yes, sound is gone.
shading.
There she is.
Okay, am I back?
Yes, you are.
Now, why would shading just be that mode?
Okay, Ria, I think we've lost you again.
I think I'm back. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, please proceed. Sue, so got over to the generator on campus.
Okay. I'm hoping Ria can do the forwarding of the slides, but thanks, Ria, for the introduction. And I'm keeping an eye on Yolandi's expression to make sure that you can hear me. Okay. Let me just. I think Ria said that she's switching over to the generator, so hopefully she'll be with us soon. The usual challenges. There we go. Thanks, Ria. Okay, so I'm going to keep it quite short. I think the idea is we'll each sort of address a component of, I suppose, getting your research published and out into the public. And then I think if people have questions, you can pop them into the chat or just jot them down, and we'll try and get to all of the questions at a later stage. So I think for a lot of academics, the idea of getting something published in a journal is quite a scary thought. But I want to say, if you don't try it, you don't know. And sometimes I think you'll be pleasantly surprised that it's actually not as intimidating as you think. So what are the strategies? And that's really what I'm going to talk more about, is the strategies of where you would publish and sort of what the expectations are going to be. So first of all, I think if you've gone, and I'm kind of making the assumption that you've done research, maybe you've completed your master's, maybe you've completed a PhD, maybe you're just busy with a particular research project at the moment. Look at the articles that you've been citing and what journals they appeared in. And that could give you a good idea of where your particular topic, your particular research could be published. So start off there. You can also have a look at the editorial boards. All of the journals will publish who's on their editorial board. Some of them will also publish who their peer reviewers are. And you might spot some names that you're familiar with, who are, I want to say, in a way, sort of sympathetic to your stream of research or the direction that you've taken. The other thought that you might, or a decision you might make is, do you want to publish in a journal that is open access? So there's quite a strong move away from journals where you do all the work, they publish it, and then other people have to pay for access. So open access is quite attractive. Most journals will give you the option of either, I want to say, closed access, so people have to pay to read your article, or you pay, or your institution pays to make it open access. So it's I want to say that journal publishing world is a whole world all of its own. They say it's the most profitable form of business after Google. So I think just ethically, you might say, well, open access is the way to go. Obviously, with Defsa, everything that Defsa publishes is out there for the public to use, which I think is a really nice principle. Then you could look at the ranking or the credibility of the journals. So journals are ranked in terms of, and I want to say, I suppose it's to some extent exclusivity. If it's very difficult to get published in that journal, it's quite an exclusive journal. Everybody wants their names there, but it's going to be difficult to get published. And a lot with that is those journals tend to have very high impact. So a lot of people will be reading articles in those journals and will be citing them. So that sort of goes hand in hand. So you might start at the top and aim for the highest ranked journal and submit to it. And if it's not accepted, remember that you could then submit to other journals. Okay, Ria, if you would continue.
Sue, I changed the slides. Can you see them move?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Elsevier, for instance, has a sort of bot where you can plug in the title of your paper as well as the abstract, and it will tell you which journal is the most appropriate for that particular article. Now, I did try it once. It was like, this is definitely the journal for you to publish this paper in. I submitted it to them and they rejected it. So it's not a guaranteed recipe for success, but there are, I think with AI, probably this sort of thing will grow and become more sophisticated in terms of picking a specific journal to submit your paper to. I think that's quite difficult. Well, I've certainly found it difficult if you're working across a couple of disciplines. So my interest is assessment in design education or creative education, and quite often what you write doesn't always fit maybe it's what I write, doesn't always fit well with the assessment people, and it doesn't always fit well with the design people. So you have to make sure that what you produce is appropriate for that particular journal. So look at what is being published, read as many of the articles that look like they might be in the same territory as your research, and have a look at, I want to say, it's almost the approach that people have taken for that specific journal. The journal is going to, or a conference will provide you with templates, etc. I think Ria is going to go through the Defsa templates and so on later on. They will give you instructions about what referencing style, what sort of limitation you have. Is it 3,000 words? Is it 5,000 words? Is it a short paper? Is it a long paper? They'll give you quite a few, there are often quite a few different categories that you could submit papers for. They'll give you a structure. So each journal has a particular structure that they would expect you to follow. And they vary from journal to journal. So they'll obviously want an abstract. Generally, the abstract doesn't, you're going to give an overview of what you've researched and written about. Keywords, obviously also part of that, a title, and then your main paper. They might also ask, some, for instance, might say, well, we want a small infographic of what you're covering. So you've got to read all of those things pretty carefully and make sure that you, I want to say compliant, but you're answering each of the questions or requirements that they've given to you. There's no point in doing all the work, submitting it, and being thrown out just on something quite small that you could have addressed. Read all the examples that you can. Some journals will offer editing support and language support. Just be wary of when journals ask for money. So some will ask for page fees, and I think most of the more recognized and acknowledged journals don't ask for fees of any kind. These days, it's quite popular for journals to ask if you would provide your data. So they build up a repository of data that other people can use. So that seems to be quite a trend at the moment. And then at the end of the process, once your paper has been accepted, you will be asked to basically sign the copyright over to the publisher. And so this means a couple of things. One of them being, if you are publishing in a journal which people have to pay for, you're going to write the paper, and anybody who wants to read it has to pay for it. You can, for instance, publish a pre-final version of your paper on platforms like ResearchGate, academia.edu without running into trouble, but you cannot put the final published version on those sites and provide them to people, because then you would be breaching the copyright agreement that you've signed. So, as I say, it's a bit of a strange world. This is the International Journal of Art and Design Education, which is very well recognized. And these are the instructions they give to peer reviewers. So you submit your paper to the journal. The first step is the editor will probably have a quick squiz through it and say, and I hate to say, I've had papers at that point where the editor's just got like, no, this really doesn't match our journal, submitted somewhere else. But if the editors are happy with the topic, they will hand it over to 2 peer reviewers. Remember that when you write your paper, you should ensure that you don't give, I want to say, clues to your identity, to your institution's identity, etc. So if you're quoting one of your previous articles, you're just going to put in the author. And it's probably better if you change the name of the institution. It's a small world. We all kind of know each other. So once you've submitted, the journal will send it off to 2 peer reviewers, and they are going to respond to these questions. Yeah, and you can see, I think Yolandi will follow up on some of the stuff in terms of what you're going to write about in a paper, but these are pretty standard requirements for any journal. The main thing is, does it actually fit with that journal? Are we going, Ria? I think we're going backwards. All right, we can move on. From that peer review, you would get a correspondence from the journal to say your article has been accepted with, let's say, no changes, and you would see the peer reviewer's feedback. So reviewer A, reviewer B. They might say it's great, but you should make these minor changes, or they might suggest a major review, or they might reject the paper. Sometimes it can be a little bit confusing. I've certainly had one paper where the one reviewer went wonderful and the other reviewer said, nope, horrible, and the paper was rejected. And that can be extremely confusing if you've got such different opinions and inputs. If your paper is accepted, you will do the revisions, but you would also submit a sort of table of their suggestions. So let's say the suggestion was to include more industry focus. You would say, thank you so much for that wonderful insight. I really appreciate the suggestion. And I have inserted references to industry input in this section, You can also say, thanks so much for that wonderful input, but it really isn't appropriate to whatever we're trying to achieve in this article. I want to say one of the big ones is you don't have enough words to actually include it in the article because of the limitations, but you should respond to each of their suggestions, even if it's just, if they were being very complimentary, is to say, thank you, that's great, you appreciate the support. So you will always respond to what they've asked you to and make the amendments in the actual text. You would then submit it to the journal, and it goes through a few editing processes where you will be able to read the thing, make final corrections. Eventually, hopefully it gets published, and they will send you a couple of free copies, which is cool. And then your work is out there, which is really exciting, especially when people start to read it. And you can also monitor how many people are reading your articles. If you've got it on academia.edu or ResearchGate, but Google Scholar also will monitor how many citations you have per article. I'm not too sure. I think in the public institutions, that's quite valuable for you to substantiate your, I want to say, value as an academic. And maybe it's just good for the ego to see these things. When it comes to rejection, and I can remember Chrissy Bowie from Rhodes saying, you can have a wonderful reputation, you can have published thousands of articles, but every now and then you'll have an article rejected. And that's just, unfortunately, life. And I think from there, as I've said before, you can say, well, okay, too bad, I've learned something from this. Let me rewrite it for another journal. And I want to say I had one article that I think I rewrote 4 times for 4 different journals until it was eventually accepted. And you literally have to rewrite it every time. So it's a lot of work, but hopefully in the long run, it's worth it. So don't be too stressed if something is rejected. It happens to everybody. Okay, Ria. And yeah, here are just a couple of resources. I want to say I just included those two journals because they actually look very similar. International Journal of Art and Design Education, which is published by Wiley, and then the International Journal of Design Education, which is a common ground research art journal. They also have some quite cool conferences, but they're a lot more about making money. So if you want something published, you have to join Common Ground. It does give you access to, I would say, a discount to their conferences, but you'll see that there's quite a lot, you pay for quite a lot of stuff with them. But it's relatively easy to get published by them. And then today I saw that USAF has set up a couple of digital platforms and resources for early researchers. So those look really interesting. They've just launched them, but I think there are resources for people who want to do research and publish. And then from what I can see, there's also a sort of online repository where you can store your stuff. So I think that's me.
Thank you very much, Sue. Lots of words of wisdom, and especially about rejection. Wow, that's the worst. I remember my first one. It took me a long time to get over it. Yolandi?
I agree regarding the rejection. It's part of being an academic. It's actually just part of being of life, of being a human. Whether it's a date that you're rejected to, or whether it's research or article, it's basically the same thing. So I'm not as distinguished as Ria made me out to be, but what I want to share today is just things that I learned along the way that can help some of the more novice researchers on this call. And that slide that you see on your screen is just a summary of what I'm going to speak about today. So firstly, don't cram it. It won't fit. So this was one of the biggest dilemmas that I faced. So I love writing and I write way too many words over word count. So if I was to be a student, I would have been heavily penalized. That's just me. So what I found is after I completed my PhD, you are expected to write an article, but to transform that doctoral study into an article is a tedious task, because the reality is your article only has so many words. So you need to accept that even though you've worked so hard on pulling all the strings together in your study, yes, you were supposed to do that. The role or the function of an article is different. You need to focus it. So you will need to decide what is spilling out of your glass, and so what will fit and what won't fit, and make that call for you. And one of the ways that you can do that is just by reading the call carefully. So if we say we're looking at Defsa, have a look at the call. What are they asking for? And then try to position your research or your master's or your doctoral into that gap that you can identify there. So identify a focus. So we all know that if we have too many targets that we're trying to hit, we're not going somewhere, we're going to miss something. So by identifying just one target, it's going to make it so much easier to write and to focus your article. And also then decide from your research studies, what objective are you going to focus on? So often we have 3 or 4 different objectives. And now is then the time to have a look at the call, have a look at what you really want to do, how's it going to fit, and which of those objectives can fit in there, and what can you save for a next time. And then lastly is have a look at your headings. Use your headings in the sense of structure it. I'll come to the outline, but use your headings to guide you what you can put in it. But I'll get back to that point. My second tip is write a story. And this is something that took me a little bit of time. So when we're writing our master's or doctoral research, we often write in a very tight-lipped, old-style academic style. So what is coming to the front is a more story-orientated, but still with the academic rigor. And as with any story, you need to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And what is important here is not telling the story as it happened, rather tell the story in a logical fashion. So we are designers, so use our design skills for this. So take out a piece of paper, make a storyboard of 8 frames and say, oh, you know what, I did this and then this happened and then this, but you need to, even though it may happen in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but logically the story just tells better in steps 1, 5, 4, 3, 2. Write it that way, but just ensure your academic rigor remains. So use a storyboard. If you're unsure what story you want to tell, a storyboard is also a good idea, just to get your head around what am I going to tell people. And that's actually quite important. I'll get to that when we speak about introductions. So it's about what story are you going to tell through your research paper. Don't write and edit at the same time. You are just going to make yourself very negative. Rather do 20-minute bursts of writing. I remember Sue and I attended, I don't know whether it was a workshop or whether it was just a presentation, but where they said do 20 minutes of intense writing. So write for 20 minutes, break for 10, write for 20 minutes, break for 10, and write another 20 minutes. And then only go and reread and edit some of it. Otherwise, you're going to correct yourself the entire time. As you're writing your story and while you're working on your storyboard, it might be very important to highlight your argument clearly. Don't bury it in a haystack. We're not going to find it. Nobody's going to look for it. You need to say, this is my argument. This is what I'm going to tell you. And this is why it's important. Like I said, ensure your academic rigor. And then it's always good to have someone be your reader, whether it's a friend, whether it's a fellow colleague. I use my husband as my reader, because if someone from another discipline can understand what you're writing it correctly at this stage. Because you also need to think about the people that don't understand our discipline and don't understand our terminology. So if that is maybe your mom and she can help you with that, her opinion is still going to be very valuable. So my next tip is divide and conquer. If you start from the beginning with an outline and you know how many words you need to dedicate to what section, it's going to make your life just so much easier. So I'll get to some other points as well, but what I laid out there is you can have an introduction that can be 10 to 15% of your word count, a body, and in that body section, you need to contextualize what your research is, You can write a background, or orientation, or you can write the problem statement. So it depends really what you want to do. You can include literature review, or you can either use your literature review separate, or you can integrate it more into your story. Some of the design, our theoretical frameworks or theoretical underpinnings isn't as strong in design research, but we do have some theoretical frameworks that we can use. So if there is a framework that you want to talk about or that you use throughout your studies, that also needs to come in there. You can write about your research design and your method, and the discussion of your findings, and then end off with a conclusion, but not the way that our students do it. You know, our students always leave it to the last minute and write a really pathetic conclusion. Your conclusion is very important here. This is where your punch comes in. So this is where you need to show what is your contribution. Why is this study, how does this study contribute to new knowledge? So I've showed you just an outline, and you will see that I merged the body together because it's actually quite difficult, or not difficult, but every paper is unique depending on what you're writing and from the perspective you're writing and what you think is really important. So what I would advise you to do is go and have a look at the previous articles or conference papers of Defsa that is uploaded to that link, and go and have a look at what headings does these authors use. There's always the introduction and there's always a conclusion. But then what is in between differs. Some talks about contextualization, some talks about orientation to the study. Some include a very short methodology section, some include a longer methodology section. But what most of the researchers does do is they have a discussion session about the findings, because that's the most important part almost. But what then happens is some has a literature in the front, like you would have with your chapters, and some would have their literature integrated into the findings. So it depends where you want to place your literature, but it needs to play a supporting role and add to that academic rigor. So also you need to decide. So once you have decided or saw an outline that you think can work for you with some of the headings, decide what headings you want, and then try to group all the different topics that you have together into like little clusters, almost like you would do with coding, so identify themes that you can pull through. Decide also, why are you writing? Why are you writing the story? Do you want to remind people about something? Do you want them to help them understand something? Or do you want to share a new perspective about something? So what is your purpose? Why are you writing this article? And then also, what is your focus? Is this a review of the literature, a theory-focused article? Is it a methodological article where you have a new method that you have explored, and through this, the methodology is then sort of interlink into your findings, so it runs through. So it's a new method that you want to share, so that's your contribution? Or is it your findings? So where's your focus? Is it the theory? Did you discover a new theoretical framework that you're now incorporating, or did you create your own theoretical framework that you would like to share? Then the focus would lie on the theory. If it's a methodological or article, your focus would lie there, and so forth. And then lastly is just on the point of uniqueness, we are unique. And as designers, we are actually quite powerful, but often we underestimate ourselves. And Ria is going to talk a little bit about how to use visuals in support as a designer. Use your skills. So yeah, I'm going to leave that for Ria. And then I think this is my last slide. Check yourself. Use your outline, but remember your article is unique because you are unique. So keep your golden thread. So how do you do that? Decide on your keywords and make sure that you don't stray from that path. If you use student motivation, it's student motivation that's going to run through. You're not going to bring in a new concept like perceptions or student engagement anywhere. It's student motivation. So use your keywords to pull through that golden thread. Use an outline to plan right from the beginning. Don't do it later on. Plan it and decide how much percentage-wise are you going to attribute to your article. Group ideas into categories. Use concept maps to plan everything, to pull everything together. You can decide whether you want to have a standalone literature section or would you rather like to integrate it so it's interwoven in your article. Pay attention to small details because like as Sue said, it's often the small details that hinders that you get published. And then make sure that you proofread your own work and, if possible, get someone that can read, such as a reader that can read for you, that can give you a little bit feedback just to help you. And that's it from me.
Thank you very much, Yolandi. Are there any questions at this stage? Marieta's making a comment. She's saying it's very helpful. No specific questions. Thank you. I'm so glad that Yolandi spoke about being your unique self, because you also develop a research identity. You know, as a researcher, I must apologize for not switching my camera on. I'm not sure if our campus is. I see I only have got a couple of stripes. So apologies for that. The last couple of minutes before we open the floor for more questions is to specifically look at some Defsa requirements. And you will find a lot of useful information on the Defsa website, as I always tell students to do, but as we all know, we sometimes don't go there. So I just made a couple of screen grabs for everybody to actually look at. If you go to defsa.co.za, you'll see there's a full paper template and instructions and wonderful tips. You can see there's also a link that says full paper submission. And on that, there's a template that you can use for your paper. This is a big help, especially if it is the first time that you actually write something for publication. Now, as Sue also said, Defsa also have got a set of criteria. The first question is, does the paper address the conference theme? And that has got a 20% weighting. The second criteria is, does the paper contribute to design education in Africa, South Africa, but also Africa? Is it relevant to local theory and practice, our technologies, our methodologies, knowledge, curricula, pedagogy, and assessment? So is it about design education? That is a 30% weighting. And the biggest weight is then for is it valid research? Is it original? Is it academically sound? Is it evidence-based and not opinion or hearsay? So that is the 50% weighting that actually counts the most. Now, I did review some of the abstracts. And I saw in some of them that some authors forgot that it is research. There wasn't anything about it's a case study or it's a survey or how you actually did, that there was sampling and the method of the sampling and so on. Just remember all the research 101s need to be there so that you can show that your work is valid and that it is trustworthy. And you also need to be able to explain why is it valid and trustworthy. It's okay if it's a smaller case study or a case of one. Now, it is a conference paper that might, if it's a smaller case or a case of one or a classroom experience or some action research that you did just in one case so far, you can share it, but then it is a case study of one. Then you can't go and say that this will change the entire way we teach because you don't have the evidence for that. So again, just go back to your research foundations and look at the validity and the rigor, what Yolandi also spoke about. It's a 5-point rubric, and then it's scored, if it's above 70%, it's accepted without revisions, 60 to 69 with minor revisions, 21 to 59 is major revisions, 20 and below is not accepted. Now, if you do get your response back and it is accepted with major revisions and you decide, well, you're not going to do it for now, you might need to step back and redo some of your research, etc. Speak to us, send us a mail, because you can still come and present it in a shorter time span, in a short paper category. And also when you are at this stage, when you've got an abstract that's been sent in and you cannot make the deadline, don't immediately say, oh, I'm not going to present. There is space for work in progress papers. So once this process starts, you can speak to the conference organizers about the different options. Sometimes a work in progress will give you valuable input. People will see what you do. They can give you feedback. Somebody might join you and say, well, listen, I'm doing something similar. Maybe we can join our two data sets and we can do a bigger paper together. So stay within the stream. Don't immediately say, listen, now I'm out. So if you look at the Defsa template, if you go into that space where the template is, Defsa actually makes it very easy. There's a template with a style sheet. So, and there's actually a description of what should be in what section. So it really helps you. So, but you're obviously not going to, we did see one or two people saying just section 8. Now, please just give your section heading a heading. As Yolandi said, tell the story. But you can see, you basically download this and then use the style sheet, in Word, where you can go, your title will be heading 1, your headings will be heading 2, your bodies and normal, and there's even a word counter at the bottom of the page that shows your word count to see where you are actually with your writing, and also a link to the specific Harvard. It's quite a general Harvard. I think it's the one that most of us are familiar with. Another reason for using this template is when your paper are accepted for the peer-reviewed proceedings, it gets put into a PDF document. And if we all stick to the same style, then we don't need somebody to go and restyle and reformat this. So it just makes it a lot easier once it actually gets into the process. So yes, we've said it's about communication. Your research need to communicate. I can't tell you how many papers I've seen where it's just words and a diagram or an infographic or an image would have made it so much more engaging and interesting, because you want people to actually read your papers. And if you've hit with that block of text, it's sometimes so difficult to engage with it. And you know how it is, how people look at things. You know, they look at, what does it look like? Can I see the story? So look at your resolution, keep it higher resolution. You can bring it down. Your entire submission must not be more than, I think, 5 meg. So 200 ppi, it's not getting printed. It is digital and the PDF for DHEADS. It's between 3,000 to 5,000 words, your list of references included. Now, this is a lesson that Yolandi and I learned. We once wrote a paper and we had a lot of references and we were so over the word count. It was so difficult we couldn't really find a way to tell our story in fewer words. So we had to really look at our references. If you refer to an author only once, look at it and say, wow, is it really necessary? You know, or could I find a source that's a bit broader? Because you can't have 3 to 4 pages of references, then you're not going to stick within your word count. Then again, do not use proprietary information. As Sue said, it is going out for peer review, and it's your institution would most probably have a policy that would say that you cannot name the institution. There are cases where it's a specific case study where you, for example, analyze an advertising campaign where it's visible. This is who it is. You know, in that case, depending on what it is, you can't get away from naming who you are researching about. But we are going to have another workshop on research ethics in 2 weeks. So I'm going to tell you more about that at the end of this presentation. Just some other pointers. If you do take photographs during workshops, for example, if it's action research, try not to take pictures that show participants' faces. I've had cases now where we had to send in, similar to a model release form, like an explicit approval from each person in that photograph that photograph may be published, and it is sometimes very difficult. So when you want to take a picture of a design thinking workshop, do it like this bottom one, or crop it out that you actually show the spirit of what you want to say, but not the individuals, or take photographs in silhouette from the back, something like that. Okay, I'll be gender sensitive. I see that they're all new ways of using language to be gender sensitive. Just read through it. Can't always say he, he or she or they. Look at that. As you work through your data, keep everything. Keep your steps. Keep your raw data and the systematic steps during your analysis. You're not going to put it in your article as raw data, but somebody might ask for it, especially with all the eyes on us now in terms of academic integrity. You might be needed to provide it. Then obviously get the referencing right. You know, check that all your in-text references are in the list of sources. That you don't want to make that sort of mistake. Then think about your presentation while you write your paper. It will help you in the end. Again, start from a storyboard, end with a presentation. Use our design intelligence to help you through the writing process. Then on the defsa.org website, you'll find record of all the conferences. You can see there's the conference proceedings overview, there's the full conference proceedings. You'll see the organizing committees, the call for papers, and then very importantly, the DHEAD compliance certificate. This is quite important if you do speak at other conferences. If it's not DHEAD accredited, you cannot claim that half a point that that DHEAD gives for the subsidy. Then it's simply a conference just for presentation. Defsa is DHEAD compliant. Therefore, we also very carefully look at all the processes in terms of peer review and so on. But go and look at that. It's from 2001, I think. You'll find everything in there. Then We also have got a YouTube channel. The YouTube link is at the bottom of the main website. So we had the previous session on practice-based design research, and you can find that link there. And you can also find recordings of the previous Defsa conference. So when you actually start to plan your presentation, go and look at that and go and look at what not to do and what to do. Look at what your slide should look like and not blocks of text. Practice a little bit. We had to make pre-recordings for the previous conference, and I must tell you, it was the most difficult I ever had to do in my entire life. I'd rather stand in front of an audience of 500 than sit behind a computer and record myself. This conference is dual. You can present in person, or there's also space for pre-recorded if you can't get to the Defsa venue. But look at that YouTube. It will also give you some pointers. And then just a quick introduction for our next talk. Sorry that these talks are so close to each other, but we tried to get both of them done before you submit your final papers. It is on research ethics, and Rudy de Lange will host this, and he's going to talk broadly the fundamentals of research ethics, but all the new AI and the ChatGPTs, what can you do, what can't you do, and the processes like ethics clearance certificates and ethics about data collection, etc. So I think that is going to be a really useful talk for all of us. And we've got a couple of minutes left for some questions. I see Tatu asked if there's a template for short papers. No, Tatu, there's not a template. You are going to receive more information about the format for the short papers. It will basically be your presentation, and the deadline is also much later for that. But the conference organizers will send that out. They're still looking at the number of short papers we do have. Are there any other questions? Any comments? Maybe anybody want to share their own research journeys? Everybody's very quiet. I see some thank yous and some positive feedback. Inga, that's very kind of you. So after we've got these two workshops, are there any suggestions for additional research workshops that you would like us to look at? We are definitely going to continue our workshops along the lines of practice-based design research, but are there any other needs from the design educators community in terms of research skills? You can type it in the comments or just shout out. So more on structuring your paper. Tips, tricks, do's and don'ts. Thank you, Stefan. I think based on what we've done here and some of the resources, that might be something that we can put on the website. I think that's then everything for today. Thank you very much for attending this session, and I will send the invite out for the session on research ethics. And please keep the questions and the tips for the extra sessions you would like to have. You can type it in the comments even after the meeting has concluded. Thank you so much and drive safely.